When I finished my Guinness World Record marathon, I got interviewed by a reporter for a really prestigious sports publication. And they came back and they said, I'm so sorry. My editor says we can't publish this because we'd be promoting, quote, obesity.
Oh my God.
Right. And this is a thing that happened. The idea that a fat
What
person
year was
shown
this? I want it to be 1933.
Noah's like 2017.
Yeah, I'm not
So,
surprised at
yeah.
all.
And so he was like, this is what happens, right? That the idea that if you show a fat person as anything other than self-loathing and desperate to be thin, somehow I was like, I said, your editor thinks that people are going to read the story and be like, I want to do a marathon, so I guess I should become fat. Like they think that that's your editor of a
Yeah.
major sports publication. Like that's where they're at in their logic. Is that what you're telling me? And the reporter laughed, but he was like, they're not going to publish it. And so for years and years, we've been denied representation, the ability to be and have role models.
Hello, I'm Cadence DeVries. This is Busybody Podcast, and today I'm very delighted to have with me Ragen Chastain. Can you introduce yourself and what do you call yourself? What you have just a breadth of knowledge and experiences, and somehow have turned them or kind of lensed them all into a career. If that's
Yeah.
a verb.
That's exactly what happened, actually. So, hi, everyone. Ragen Chastain. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a speaker, writer, and researcher, and my area of expertise is the intersections of weight science, weight stigma, health, and healthcare. And so, primarily, most of my work is talking to healthcare providers and allied health professionals about best practices for working with higher weight people. And then I also help higher weight people navigate weight stigma within health and fitness.
I have, this is where I got stuck when I was like thinking of questions. You're also a dance champion and a 2-time marathoner and a triathlete. So there was like a whole moment where I was like, what if we just talk about dance and running nerd things for the whole podcast? But I kind of want to start there because I want to ask you how you got into all of this. And I have a feeling it was because of these interests or, being yourself in the world and then being like, hey, no one is advocating and no one knows what they're talking about.
Kind of, some yes, some no. So I always, when I talk about fitness, want to start out by saying, like, I happen to enjoy fitness, but there's this thing within weight stigma that's often called the good fatty, bad fatty dichotomy. The idea that fat people, and I use fat as a positive descriptor of myself, like I would say shorter brunette, but that fat people who perform health to someone's satisfaction based on how they eat or how they exercise, that the idea that those people somehow deserve better treatment than fat people who don't perform health or fitness to somebody's satisfaction. And so I want to be really clear that that's super messed up, that I'm privileged by that, whether I want to be or not. And so it's incredibly important for me to speak out against that and to say that, like, I'm interested in doing those things, but it's no better or worse than somebody who wants to like knit a tea cozy or watch every episode of Star Trek that ever aired. So that's
I
my
literally-
disclaimer there.
I wrote a piece about that just like fitness is an interest in a hobby and like good for you if you're into it. And if you're not, there's people out there that like, collect Pokemon whatevers. And I don't know anything about that world, but it's a world in many ways as large as the fitness world.
Exactly. Yeah. Ilya Parker from Decolonizing Fitness coined the term toxic fitness culture. And to me, it's like from the movie Dodgeball, where he's on the screen and he's like, at Globo Gym, we're better than you. And we know it. Like that's toxic fitness culture in a nutshell. And so I really always want to be pushing back against that. But actually, I got into ballroom dance. For over 20 years now, I had been looking into the research around weight and health. It started with me actually looking for the best diet I was trying to figure out because I had been yo-yo dieting for years and my background is research methods and statistics. And so I did a literature review of all the weight loss research I could find. And like, I wasn't in school. I didn't publish. This is just the kind of nerd that I am in my life. And when I found that there wasn't a single study where more than a tiny fraction of people were actually succeeding at long-term significant weight loss, that was kind of what put me down this rabbit hole of looking at weight neutral health. And so I was on a personal journey, but I didn't think of it as like activism. And I had done a lot of work. Like I started my activism career. Well, my mom says I staged my first protest in kindergarten. Like I got my classmates to chant and protest against nap time. But in general, in college, I did a lot of queer and trans activism in the mid 90s in Texas. And that's kind of where I started, took a lot of like solidarity, anti-racism training, that kind of thing. But I never thought of fat people as like a group of people being oppressed. And so I actually ended up in ballroom dance because a friend and I went to ballroom dance lessons at a gay country western bar in Austin. And people were like, oh, you're really good. You should compete. And both of us are hyper competitive. So we were like, you can like win stuff at this? And so we like got a coach and started training and entered our first competition a few months later. And it was such an intense period because I had some dance training, but I grew up in very rural America. So my youth dance training was like whoever's mom had taken the most dance like classes, teaching all the girls. Like that was sort of my experience. And so it was such an intense preparation time, learning all the techniques, the choreography, 5 different dances, that when I got to the competition, I actually thought they were going to judge me on my dancing. And then judges said things to me like, oh, you're so talented. Like, you're going to lose weight, right? Like, what a waste of talent.
Oh my God.
And then finally it kind of came to a head. I did a competition. I was sick. And so I was just trying to get back up to my hotel room and I had all my gowns and shoes and makeup. And she like charged at me, kind of pinned me against an elevator and said to me repeatedly, I couldn't stand to look at you.
Oh my God.
Because I was wearing a dress that had spaghetti straps. And she said, she put her finger in my face and was like, you have no business wearing spaghetti straps.
Oh my God.
And
what year was this?
It would have been like 2004, maybe.
Yeah,
I'm
like,
terrible with
height of
dates
the
and
Jennifer
time.
Aniston, like
Yeah.
incredible shrinking sitcom stars.
Yeah, it was, and I like in that moment, I was like, bing, this has nothing to do with me.
Yeah.
Right? Like this is a person who's trying to give me her insecurities. And I was hoping at that time to get like a Wii for Christmas or something. I don't remember. And so I went back up to my room and I took a shower and I was like, yeah, no, this isn't gonna, and finally, what I finally said to get out of the conversation, because she said, well, I talked to your coach and he said I could talk to you. And I was like, well, I'm 30, so you don't have to ask for permission to talk to me. And I probably, in truth, I probably won't choose to change the dress, but I appreciate you taking the time to tell me it's such a problem for you. And her face got super red. And like, I thought maybe she would swing on me. Like I was not sure what was going to happen. And she stormed away. And so I realized sort of in that moment that what I wanted to be was a fat dancer and what I'd have to be was a fat activist to get that done. And at the time, I did not know there was a thriving community of fat activists that had been going on since before I was born. Right. And so I started my little blog, Dances with Fat, just to talk about my experiences as a fat dancer from a fat positive perspective. And so dance is actually what made me a fat activist. And then when I moved away from Austin, I lost my coach and my partner and I decided to try something different and I injured my neck, my spine. And so everything I like to do, I'm a fast twitch athlete all the way and I couldn't do any of those things. And so my doctor was like, you can walk or you can take water aerobics. And the water aerobics hurt my neck. So it was walking. And I was like, I'm just not a take a walk person. A full support for people who are, I just get bored. And so I was like, I need to have some kind of goal or I'm not going to do this. And so I had 20 weeks of rehab and I found it was 20 weeks till the Seattle Marathon where my best friend lives. So I emailed him and I was like, you want to do a marathon with me? And being a good best friend, he emailed back immediately, I'm in. And so I did the first one. And then I learned that I could have gotten the Guinness World Record for heaviest woman to complete a marathon. And I was like, great, I'll send my time. They'll send like a second medal. Like, this is going to be great. And in fact, there's a bunch of hoops. So I had to do a second marathon to get the Guinness World Record. Because I had sworn up. We were like, team, never again. Like, we're never doing this again. Why do we think this was a good idea? And so I had to do the second one to do that. And then I got into triathlon as a way to like be slow at 3 sports instead of just the one.
Did you ever watch that sitcom East Side and Down or something? I can't remember what it's called. It's some comedian. He plays like a washed up pro baseball player who's like in this little town. It was like
No,
semi-offensive but funny at the same time. They're basically just a line that I always think of that I think is hysterical about triathlon, where there's like this nerdy principal that he's jealous of, who's like the guy that has it all, and he's like washed up sad guy, and the principal is like, oh, you're an athlete. I just completed my 3rd triathlon. And he's like, I'm sorry, sir. I'm an athlete. I'm not just the best at sports. Or the best at exercise. I'm like ruining the line.
Best to exercise, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a special situation. I got a lot of really interesting insights by being within that community because what I decided, like, I did not want to be a triathlete. I wanted to do an Ironman triathlon.
Well,
So
I'm
I
already seeing this
started with
theme.
that
Like,
goal.
you are a really goal setting person. And like, basically put a goal in front of you and you're like, yes, doing it already, mapping it out. Like, even just the thing you started with, like, oh, I did entire research on all of the stuff that I didn't even publish. I mean, you set your mind to something and then you just go. Like, I'm not putting down triathlon at all. I just did a half marathon. I'm all into the endurance sports, but it takes a real kind of person to sign up for these things and be interested in doing an Ironman, which is just like, how many more things can I do? Like,
Right. And for how long? Like
yeah.
it's and I never got to do it. It was an absolute debacle. An 8-year odyssey of every
Oh my God.
time I had a race, something ridiculous I would get sick, somebody, a partner, my mom went in the hospital. Like it was just a nightmare. And this is not my strong suit. So it was just a constant fight. Plus, like there's one wetsuit in the whole world that we could find that fits me.
Yeah.
I had to get a bike made because they don't make bikes for my geometry. So just like getting dressed to work
Yeah.
out at this level. It was bonkers. So I had decided instead of competing at an Ironman where they have a lot of like time cutoffs that maybe I might get to like halfway through the marathon and they pull you off the course, which I was absolutely not willing to deal with. I would just do my own course, right?
Yeah.
And the plan was to do it in May of 2020.
Oh my God.
So we went into and I was hitting my goals. I was like, finally, I'm going to like do this and cross this finish line. And I never, ever have to do any of this again. And then it just never happened. And by the time quarantine was over, I had decided to go back to school and I had a lot of like work that I wanted to do. And so I just didn't re-pick it up. But I
Yeah.
did train for it. And it was an interesting experience to train for something like that.
We could literally, like, this is where I was like, so many questions. We could literally just talk about this subject. I want to just stay here a little bit longer because of what you just said about the wetsuit and the bike. I do a lot of just like, literally, there weren't running shoes for women until like basically 20-ish years ago, if not more recently. So having gear, having sports bras for bigger bodies, having just like anything. And I didn't even think about this because I don't do any kind of like cycling in any competitive way, but those crazy fancy bikes that people use, those things are, I'm sure, designed for number one, male bodies, number two, probably male bodies that are like, what I weighed when I was 9 years old or something. Like, what was that experience? Because yeah, everything you're saying, just training for those in the most general sense is grueling. The mental, I mean, I just did a half marathon. Actually, it was a 23K, which is 14 miles, not 13 miles, which I have to keep saying because when I was running it, I was like, you know what? If this had ended 1 mile ago, I would have been okay with that. So I earned that
Right.
last mile.
Yeah. No, we don't run for free. We count all the miles. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. When I finished, I was like, I realized just how much mental energy it was taking up in terms of like psyching myself up for the long training runs every week, planning them, the snacks, the time, the recovery time, the preparation time, like blah blah blah, and like the lead up to the race, like making sure I have my water bottles and my layers and all these things. And I'm just a straight size person who's like kind of a slow runner, and like my barriers are that I'm slow. People certainly don't consider that I have a runner's body, and I'm not even a plus size person, but I'm not just a sinewy little runner going out there. So I can only imagine, on top of just the base level of strain that goes into that kind of training, the other barriers that you had. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, it is a really frustrating thing because you've got, on the one hand, all of these people, and this is not right, but you've got people like, oh, fat people need to exercise, fat people need to exercise. But
Right.
then, like, every barrier in the world is put up to keep that from happening. And I remember when Nike came out with their first plus size line, which, by the way, was not big enough to fit me. And the same, like, trolls who were, like, bothering me every day for not being athletic enough, for not doing enough, were then complaining that these clothes existed.
Right.
So like they want me to work out, but apparently in a toga fashion from a bed sheet. Like I'm not sure. And the more you do, the more you need actual technical gear,
Yeah.
right? You cannot do, a 70-mile bike ride in just like some cotton shorts. Like that is Chafetown population you.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
it
I
was
even
really
found
tough.
some of my shorts that were fine for 6 miles. After 10 miles, Chafetown population me. Like just the
Yes.
weirdest things where you're like, oh, I love this sports bra. And then you're like, oh, after 5 miles, it's knives in my waist. Like,
Yes, 100%. Oh my gosh. I used to carry like a tiny bottle of Aquaphor and just be like, where is
yeah.
it today? Like, let's not make this worse than it has to be. But yeah, just getting kid out. And when you think about it, like just trying something out, right? I had some friends who were like, let's try kayaking. And so I called ahead because I know what happens. And no, they didn't have a life vest in my size, nor did they have a kayak that would work for me.
Yeah.
So everybody else got to try kayaking for like $30. I would have had to purchase a kayak just to see if I liked kayaking because there was no way to access that. And then I would have had to buy my own life vest, and the kayak that is for higher weight people exponentially more expensive.
Of course. Yeah.
Right. So like it's this constant thing of just having to fight just to like get out there in the first place. And then when you do get out there, there's the, teasing. And there was a point where people pulled over and threw eggs at me during one of my like marathon trainings, like 9 miles in or something, which was ridiculous. Also more ridiculous, they missed like a 300-pound target from 3 feet away. I wanted to run after them, like to talk about their fat phobia, but also throwing mechanics. I was like, I think I can help. Because like broadside of a barn, people, if we're going to survive a zombie apocalypse, you have got to be able to throw better than this. This is not acceptable.
Oh, my Lord.
But yeah. And then I am also slow. Not every fat person is, but I am. And so that whole back of the pack situation, and Latoya Shante Snell and Martinez Evans and Myrna Valerio have been doing incredible work around that for a long time. And I highly recommend folks find and follow them and support them. They do amazing work. But yeah, there's like my marathon. I very specifically signed up for a marathon that said that the finish line would stay open until all athletes finished. And so that happened, but like they started trying to get me to quit early in the day. Like it was like a person was assigned to me, and she ended up being the sag wagon person, which is the support and gear who stays at the end with the last place person. Like all day long tried to get me to quit.
Did she really? She was literally like, do you want to stop?
She was like, you should stop.
Oh my God.
She was, and then at like the half marathon point, she's like, we talked about it. Cause I was like, I leaned in, and I don't remember exactly what I said. I wrote it down. I wrote it in a piece so I could find it. But I was like, look, I signed up for this to get a medal. Like, if I don't finish, I don't get my medal. So like, we're going to keep going. And like, if you want to find somebody else, if, whatever. And she's like, well, you could keep going, but you don't have to have an official finish. And I was like, no, unacceptable. Like, this is what you said it'd stay open till
Oh my God.
the last
I'm
athlete.
infuriated.
I'm like, I'm way longer. I thought I was going to finish hours before I did. It was like the worst day of my life from a like physical activity standpoint. But I was like, I'm not quitting. Like I will either cross the finish line or I will pass out. But one of those two things is going to happen. And like, if I pass out, then you can pull me from the race. And finally, like toward the end, she just had this change of heart. And she was like, she got the other guy, because at this point it had gotten dark. So there's like a truck who's lighting us, and there's her who's following us. And she's like, we're going to get you across that finish line. And like, I am so proud of you. And I can't believe, but also, so like this is happening. But what we were talking about was that I had to pee for a long time.
No.
And not only did they pull all the porta potties from the course before I got to them, then took down all the aid stations and the medical stations, but they were doing it. There's no way this wasn't on purpose. I mean, there is a way it wasn't on purpose, but they would pull the porta potties just as I got them in sight.
No.
So I would see them, and then they'd like load them onto the truck. And I was like, oh my God. And so this is in Seattle, in a fancy neighborhood up in the hills. And she's like, well, just pee in somebody's yard. And I'm like, you just told me Kurt Cobain's house was here. Like, I'm going to get arrested. I'm not going to pee in someone's yard in like an incredibly wealthy Seattle neighborhood. Like I'm not peeing in anybody's yard, but I'm definitely not going to pee here. So like, it was
Oh
just
my
all like
lord.
there's that whole back of the pack thing. You're living a different life, right? Like other people are doing a
We
marathon, you're doing a survival
No,
exercise.
seriously. So I do a very beginner friendly virtual run club, and we talk about this. Actually, in this season that you're going to come out in, will be an episode with my co-host of that club, who's the running coach. I do like all the injury prevention, and we we every time we have a episode, we talk about like slower runners because our group is for very big. Like we have people that are like, I've never owned running shoes before. I tried running once, I immediately got shin splints. So it's like often real beginners. We also have people that just are like, I stop and start. I can't figure out how to do this regularly. And I'm a slower runner, and you know, my co-host Rachel has done pacing for the New York City Marathon. She literally just ran her 20th marathon. I don't know how many times she's done New York City. But part of the pacing, she says, is that you end up being like the coach for whoever's around you. And she said that people that are going slower are having literally just like a more varied experience. Like if you're with the elites, you like finish the marathon so fast, like the weather is the same when you started as when you know what I mean? It's just like you're like not hungry yet because you just had breakfast, you know? And she's like, the people that are, on the course the longest, it's like a whole different day by the time they finish. They've experienced the whole course changing, the bands going home or whatever, the crowd thinning out. And I do a lot more trail running, which means you're just in the woods and you don't have crowds. But I did my first trail. I did the Brooklyn marathon, half marathon, the road one, which I had a poor experience. It was great until mile 9, and then I literally hit the wall. I did not plan my food well and like dragged myself for 4 miles with a body made of cement.
Been there.
Yeah, not fun. But I did a trail half as the first time I've done a trail half, and there was I call them sweepers. I didn't know they have the sag wagon, and I had a similar experience where I found out the night before, which thank God I found out the night before, because if I had seen it before I signed up, I might not have signed up, that they had a cutoff time for the 10K portion, and my partner was going to run the 10K, and if you didn't get there by a certain amount of time, they just direct you to the 10K finish, and you can't do the half. And I freaked out because I was like, highly likely I'm not going to make that cutoff. Like, totally likely. Also, the course had crazy elevation, like 1 mile straight up. And I was like, I can't go faster up that hill. I've run it on my trainings. It's an 18-minute power hike. I'm not going faster than that. Like, I don't know how to. So I ran the 10K completely stressed out. Like, had to pee for 3 miles, would not stop to do that, checking my watch constantly, like blood pressure out the wazoo, every mile, like just being like, oh, okay, if I can keep going this way, like going up the hills, being like, all right, I got my 1 extra minute in the last mile, so like past the 10K, like literally was just like, did I make it? And they were like, you're fine. Then I like peeled off the trail, ripped my pants off, like peeing, shoving food in my face, like walked, was like, oh my God. Like, it was just like, had to like emotionally recover for like a mile and a half, like, I mean, just ridiculous. Yes. And then I'm going, trying to get back into the groove. And there's like, suddenly this guy behind me that I'm noticing is like stopping like I stopped to tie my shoe and he stopped. And then like, I slowed down to like take my backpack off and like get another snack, and he slowed down. And then I finally turned around. I was like, are you the sweeper? And he was like, I am. And I was like, okay. And it was like only like 8.5 miles in. And I was starting to realize, I'm like, so this guy's going to just like run 9 feet behind me for the rest of the race. And I was like, I'm like alone. And I kind of planned to be alone because it's single track. There were only 14 women that signed up for this and like 25 people total or something like that. So I assumed I would be alone for like lots of miles. And now I have this like duet partner,
Awkward duet.
Yeah, exactly. And I literally was like, I'm not going to go through this like intense emotional experience with you, strange man who I've never met. Like, I was like, I know that I have like basically another 6 miles. It was a loop course with like a little extra. So I was on the little extra part, and then we were going to go back into the loop. I had to go back up that crazy elevation, like all this stuff. I was like that. I'm already anticipating the mental toll, like just psyching myself up, facing that mountain again. Like, and I was like, I don't need to like hold hands with you, sir. So similarly, I like turned around to him because he starts going, well, we got one more hill here and then it's downhill for,
Oh,
and I was
no.
like, dude, I know. I ran this as training. He thought because I was slow that I had never been on this course before. Not true. I'd already run it 3 times training. He thought I was having a bad race because I was slow. So he kept saying, you could do it one from there. And I was like, I know I can do it, sir. I'm totally fine. And so at some point I finally just turned around to him and I was like, is it possible for you to give me some space? I actually prefer running alone and I don't really want to do this with you. And he was like, oh, yeah, oh, I was just going to ask. And I was like, yeah, dude, back it up. You can still see if I like fall off a ridge. Like, that's what your job is. If I fall down a ridge, call the, search and rescue. Otherwise, I got red hair. You'll just see me bouncing along,
Yeah.
ridiculous. But I'm like a street sized person in every checkpoint because these trail runs, they have search and rescue teams at checkpoints. It sounds like it's like very off in the woods. I mean, it is, but also I don't want to give people this impression that I'm like doing some Alaskan like endurance race. It's really just like people get lost. So they have checkpoints where they're checking all of our bibs. And every time I passed one of the checkpoints, they'd be like, one foot in front of the other. You're almost there. And I was like, literally look at my face. I'm relaxed. I'm like waving to you. I'm not crying. I've seen what people look like when they're struggling and having a terrible time. They're like dragging themselves. I was fine. I'm just slower.
Just slow.
So it's okay.
My friend Jeanette DePatty, who also she's the fat chick and Everybody Can Exercise are her projects, but she was last in a marathon and the sweeper came out and and Jeanette's like, what are you doing? And the sweeper was like, oh, I'm just going to go behind you so you're not last. And she was like, oh no, like I'm last place. Like I make last place work. Like you go ahead. Like I earned this last place finish.
Yeah.
And she like really, she inspired my attitude as well. Like, but yeah, I got back to toxic fitness culture for a sec. So I finished more last place than anyone has ever been in a marathon, but I got my medal and my banana and my Mylar blanket and to go pee. Like I was fine. I was happy, proud, did the thing.
Yeah.
And then the next day people kept sending me this meme and it says, don't feel bad. You're still lapping people who are on the couch.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is so gross. Like, first of all, people on the couch did not ask to be involved in this.
Right.
And second, like, I don't need to be better than somebody to feel like I powered myself through more than 26.2 miles because they divert you off the course if you're back. This is another thing people don't know. We, instead of like going on the nice roads, the last bit of our marathon was in the mud on the side of the road. We had to cross an active bridge with no pedestrian pathway. Like it felt pretty unsafe. And so like that, the back of the pack is just like such a different thing, but there's also a camaraderie there when you are with people. But yeah, that whole thing where people, and I find, this is a back of the pack thing. It's also a fat person thing. I was in the middle of like actually toward the end of my marathon training, I did a 5K for fun with some friends, not fun for, like fun run kind of, but they wanted to do it. So I did it. And this guy, so we're going on this beach trail and like 10 people pass this person on a bench and he says nothing. I pass him and he stands up and he's like, you're amazing and you can do it. Don't quit. Don't quit. And I'm like, who said, what are you doing? Sit down.
Yeah.
Like, don't praise me, first of all, for overcoming your stereotypes of me. That is not the compliment you think it is. And also, like, sit all the way down. And so what I have taken to doing is I respond to people in the exact same tone they're using for me. So I'm like, good job sitting. You're killing it. Keep doing it. You can sit on that bench as long as you want. You got this. Like, and so that's how I deal with stuff.
That's really good. Yeah. Yeah, I really hear that because the running world, and it's part of why we have why I do the virtual run club. It's so depressing because it actually, I think running is a very inclusive sport. Like all you need is, your body. Like, you don't even need shoes. There's barefoot running. Like that, whatever, however you want to approach it. But the culture of running is incredibly elitist and exclusive and like super like heteronormative and like just it's really I wrote a whole piece about this free speed course class that takes place in a park where I am in the summertime and how the coach just like completely was uninterested in me in every possible way. And I was like, wow. And I'm in my 40s and like a seasoned fitness athlete, dancer person with my own confidence in my skills and abilities. What if this truly was the first time I'd ever come to a running situation? What if this was the first time that I thought I'll join a little run class? I would never come again. Ever, ever, never, And he barely contained rolling his eyes at my mileage. He asked me what my mileage was each week. It's just like things like that where I was just like, oh my God, like, how, like, you're supposed to be a coach, literally. So
I will say, sorry,
yeah,
before we finish. So the second marathon I did was with a group called Mainly Marathons, Mainly, though I did mine in Maine. And they are very cool. So what they do is they find tracks that are off because the reason for time limits is money. It's road closures. It costs money to close
yeah.
down roads. And so that's why the time limit. The race is a distance. It's not a time, right? 26.2, that's a marathon. Doesn't matter how long it took you to get there. And so, and my thing with fitness always is nobody is obligated to participate, but everybody who wants to should be welcome. And so that's always what I'm fighting for, right? But mainly marathon, so they pick these courses that are there's no traffic, right? They're trails and they're looped courses. There's no time limit. They said the longest someone ever took was 15 hours for a marathon. They do like a 5K, a 10K, a half, a full, and a 30K. And you're all on the same course. So even though you're like at the what would be the quote unquote back of the pack, you're still passing other people.
Right. That's super cool.
For a long time. And it was the most diverse group of people I had ever seen in a marathon. It was much smaller. I mean, I did the official Seattle Marathon. There were like 10,000, 20,000, some many thousands of people. And this was like a much smaller group. It was a few hundred, but like it was so fun. Everybody was so nice. We were like cheering each other. There was one person doing the 30K and she and I just kept like passing each other. She would pass me like twice for every time I went around and we'd like wave every time. But like it was just a very cool vibe. And they cater to people who want to do like marathons in every state. So they'll do like 7 marathons in 7 days in 7 different states.
Whoa, that's super cool.
Which I'm not about to do. The one is enough. I'm going home and eating mashed potatoes. Like I'm not doing this
I
tomorrow.
don't know. I feel like if someone told you there was a medal you could get at the end of it, you might.
I mean, there is like, so you get 7 medals, and if you do all 7, you get a special medal. So but I was like, no, let's not go all the way here. But I was last place in mine, and they give a special caboose medal.
Oh, that's awesome.
There's like a special medal for last place. So that is proudly hanging in my home, my caboose medal.
That's really cool. Yeah, I do think like that's what's exciting about the running culture is that it is kind of like a subculture. It's like Nike has made it like kind of foisted it into being like, it seems like everybody runs or something, but like the true running world, I think has so many niches all over the place. I've come to really like trail running because I find that road runners are a lot more uptight and road running is a lot more like how many miles am I doing at what time? And it's just not as fun and it's super repetitive. Like trail running, you're passing like a creek and a this and a that and like birds are there. Like there's a lot more happening. But do you feel this way? I do feel like, and it's something I try to tell our beginner runners, especially when you're in cities, there's actually a lot of diversity, especially body diversity at races, 5Ks and 10Ks and marathons. And I think the idea that all runners are like thin and wiry or whatever is very false. And that when I always feel so kind of empowered when I do join bigger races. And then I'm just like, oh my God, like everyone is here, all ages, all bodies, like all abilities, even people are like limping and running and like, there's just like all kinds of things happening. Is that your experience?
Yeah. And what's cool, I think, is that it can be so diverse at these races. The the flip side, and I think part of the problem is one of representation. So, like when I finished my Guinness World Record marathon, I got interviewed by a reporter for a really prestigious sports publication. And they came back and they said, I'm so sorry. My editor says we can't publish this because we'd be promoting, quote, obesity.
Oh my God.
Right. And this is a thing that happened. The idea that a fat
What
person
year was this? I want it to be 1933.
No, it was like 2017.
Yeah, I'm not
So,
surprised at
yeah.
all.
And so he was like, this is what happens, right? That the idea that if you show a fat person as anything other than self-loathing and desperate to be thin, somehow I was like, I said, your editor thinks that people are going to read the story and be like, I want to do a marathon, so I guess I should become fat. Like they think that that's your editor of a
Yeah.
major sports publication. Like that's where they're at in their logic. Is that what you're telling me? And the reporter laughed, but he was like, they're not going to publish it. And so for years and years, we've been denied representation, the ability to be and have role models. And so then people believe that it's not for them. When I started as a ballroom dancer, and then I had a cabaret company that choreographed for and danced in. But people would say, oh my God, I always wanted to dance, but I never saw someone my size doing it. This was like when I started my blog in like 2009, right? My blog, which is called Dances with Fat, right? So people would find me with various searches, and like, that's a huge problem because there were fat dancers long before me.
Yeah, I
Right. And
mean,
like
ballet people were curvy or whatever you want to call it before kind of the Balanchine takeover. I mean,
Yeah.
if you look at old videos pre that, they look, like modern dancers, they look like they just have body diversity basically, big boobs,
Yeah.
squishy arms, whatever. That aesthetic even of a ballet dancer is very new.
Yeah. But yeah, so it's this denial of representation, which is like to be denied your achievement, right? And then to not have the ability to see yourself represented. And then, yeah, and going back to then so there's the barricades of that. There's the fact that you likely, unfortunately, will experience weight stigma if you're out there. Not from race participants, I will say. I had people over exuberant about it, like, oh my God, you're a hero. And I'm like, nah, I'm just out here doing the exact same thing you're doing. Right. But I understand where they're coming from, and I understand it's well intentioned. So I don't want to be bitter about it, but I also want to be aware that like we're all doing the same thing. And I'm not sure that they're cheering me because they know I've overcome so much weight stigma, to do it. But in general, race participants are either neutral or positive. It's like trolls outside of the community who are the problem. And I also notice like it's just something you see because people will say, if you can't do a marathon in 5 hours, you shouldn't do it. If you can't do it in 7 hours, you shouldn't do it. And when you ask, lo and behold, isn't that a little bit slower than their time?
Right.
Right. So the 7 hour marathon people disagree with the 5 hour marathon people. And like, maybe if we can't all do it in 2 hours and 30 minutes, we should, right? It's a whole,
Right.
it's ridiculous. Like it's a distance. And so I really appreciate, like I said, the work that Latoya, Shantae Snell, and Martinez Evans and Myrna Valerio have been doing to really expand back of the pack experiences and teach races how to give better experiences. Like everybody who competes this race based on these race rules should have the
Right.
same experience. So if the race has a cutoff, it has a cutoff. They're clear about it. That's their business. But everybody who makes it in by that cutoff should have the exact same experience, the same aid stations, the same medical stations, the same road closures. It shouldn't be like this group of it's like survivalist mathletes, right? Because you're trying to
Right.
calculate how fast do I have to go, and like, oh, that hill's coming up. How much will that? So you're like doing a massive amount of mental math while you're
Oh my
getting
God.
snacks out of your own backpack because they shut down the aid stations, and you're getting your water bottle refilled at Starbucks or a sketchy bar. Like
Yeah.
it should not be like that. It should be the same experience for every racer who competes based on your race rules.
Absolutely. I feel like we should move on from running, even though I just want to talk about running. Well, this is my segue. I think that a lot of people, this is a place that I try to bring my expertise. I think a lot of people like don't understand like literally fat adipose tissue does not distort or it does not like hinder the human body from movement. And I think a lot of people think that it does, and so that they can't do things. And obviously there's also these barriers, But some of the education I've done just in my classes is just like it's on the outside of your body. Obviously, there's fat that's around organs and this and that. And while it can get in the way, like wearing a heavy coat or something, if you're trying to like do yoga, you might wish that you weren't wearing a heavy coat. It's not prohibitive or like you know, I mean, to bring it back to running and dance, I think people think that when they're in a bigger body, somehow it's like slowing you down or something like that. But actually, we become strong to carry our own bodies, and fat is like really a lightweight thermoregulating material on our bodies and all these things. And, you know, I have my own experiences in the dance world and blah, blah, but I want to, before I go too far into that, what do you think of that statement or your experience there?
Well, so I think there's just a lot of diversity of bodies. And so I think the problem is that we think about movement as like, this is how thin people do it. That's correct or normal. And then everyone else is a negative variation of that. Right. So the idea is, so people will say, oh, like my body's too big to do this yoga pose. And my answer is, no, that yoga pose wasn't made for all bodies. Right. And so things may be different as bodies are different sizes, different shapes, depending on where adipose tissue is carried. That might change your stride. That might change what you can do. As a ballroom dancer, I have like little pterodactyl pug arms. They're very short. And like my inseam is 26 inches. Every time I had a costume made, they'd be like, let's measure that again. I'm like, no, that's what it is. I'm like 5'3" and I'm predominantly made of torso. And so like that means things are different for me. And when you do moves where like your partner wraps their arm around you and you like turn into them, we had to place that very specifically on my body so that we could make that move work. Like that's just the mechanics of my body size and my partner's body size. Other people might have different issues if their arms are longer. So it's, to me, it's more about that we stop suggesting that there's like a normal, quote unquote, normal right way to do it. And it's how thin people who are athletic by some definition do it. And then there's all the like negative variations or like modifications beyond that. And we start saying like, let's make everything work for all the bodies who want to participate in it.
Do you think some of the pushback on that is that most sports has some kind of hierarchy because of competition? And so, because this is where I bump up against, I do a lot of reading and talking about the how sports are so gendered, and so women's bodies are always being compared to male bodies, and we're basically always told that we're not as good, not as fast, not as strong, all this stuff. But really, most sports have been like designed for and by men, and so we are measuring things that male bodies have a propensity to excel at. And there's also a ton of research that obviously if women got better coaching, better resources, had shoes and things designed for their bodies, that percentage gets much more narrow. But I think like that's where people push back is like, if I'm just like, why are the men and women elites at the marathon starting 15 minutes difference? They are really equal athletes. Yes, the men finish first, but giving them staggered start times is just silly. First of all, there's like only 8 of them. There's plenty of room, and they could just start at the same time. That would be such a more exciting race too, to just see them all spread out together. But we give this like false, like, oh, give the ladies a head start, whatever. I think, do you have an argument for that about kind of making things so inclusive that everyone can participate? I don't have this thought formed out. I just feel like that's the pushback. Is like, well, some people win and some people don't. And that's why this person is better and this person isn't.
Yeah. So I have a lot of thoughts about this. It's basically starts with competition shouldn't be everything when it comes to participating in sports or fitness or physical movement of any kind, right? I am very competitive. I enjoy competing, but I don't kid myself that being competitive or being at a certain level makes me like a better person, morally better, right? And so I think, first of all, if you have competitions, let's have more options for like dividing people up into different groups, right? They have age category. Like we've made this understanding already. We have elites, we have age categories. In some races, they have what are called Athena athletes, which are supposed to be higher weight athletes. This designation starts at half my size. And
That's
so
insane.
it's an interesting, like if we're saying like, oh, this makes a difference, like that's an odd, like everybody half my size and bigger and everybody half my size and smaller is the definition is pretty odd. So like finding ways to do those categories, but also decoupling value from winning some kind of physical contest and further creating more options that aren't competitive. Right. There are lots of training groups and I'm an alone runner and triathlete. I do not enjoy training with other people. I want my playlist and my misery by myself. But I know people who did groups where it was like, we're all going to finish a 5K. Like that's what we want to do. And it was like different ages, different abilities, wheelchair athletes, like all different kinds of athletes, not gender binary divided. So like trans and non-binary people, cis people, all welcome. And like, that was the thing. Like we want to finish this 5K. And like, we're not even going to time it. We're just, you start here, you end here, done, medal. And so more of that, I think would also be helpful. Like, do we want to, because what happens is we claim that we want more people to participate in movement. And research shows movement has a lot of physical health benefits. Now, health and fitness by any definition, not an obligation, not a barometer of worthiness, certainly not entirely within our control. But we, always are saying like medical professionals, people, oh, we want more people to participate in athletics. But we don't act like we do. Right. Because the people who are sort of at the peak of athletics want to get their self-esteem from being quote unquote better than other people. So if we restructured to encourage participation and achievement at all levels, then like where would they derive their self-esteem from? And then the people who are privileged and rewarded by this, as Ilya Parker calls it, toxic fitness culture, become like PE teachers and race directors. And so they're just perpetuating that because they had a great time. And they assume everybody could have their experience if they just worked hard enough, right? So it goes back to like that same like capitalism, work hard, bootstrapping nonsense, but applied in a fitness context.
You're completely describing my summer running experience with this, like, it's just a small community. So the running community there is extra small. You see the same people at all the races, and it is 100% that kind of mentality. And like literally that coach guy was just like a top athlete in the area. And now he like, is a volunteer coach or whatever. I don't know what his designation is, but I'm literally going to send you this essay that I wrote because it's just very typical what we all think of when we think of like the run coach guy. And they say that their groups are open to everyone, and they have like a summer challenge where you can sign up to run it, and basically you have to complete a certain number of the courses at the end of the summer, and there's like a little award ceremony to whoever finishes them all. But they literally, just in talking about inclusion, like they use terminology and language that like you have to essentially be a seasoned runner to even understand what they're talking about. There's like, it took me 3 years to understand what they meant by 10K pace. Like he kept being like, oh, and if your 10K pace is this, and I was like, what is he talking about? And then literally like this summer, I was like, oh, right. The longer you run, the slower your pace is. Your 5K pace is too fast to run all the time. So people that run lots of distance have a 10K pace that they know about. Just say, you know what I mean? Like, it's like 3 years of me going to this thing. I had no idea what they were talking about. That's not being inclusive. And yeah, it's everything you're talking about. And then your people are shaming people for not exercising, but then you show up to this thing. I showed up to this group that all the speedy people are literally like humble bragging about their speeds and how long they were doing, and running through injuries and all this bullshit basically. And I'm just like, thank God I know my own self, because I would just be so intimidated. Instead, I'm just like, I'm going to turn this into content.
Yes, that's my constant. I'm like, well, this will make a good post.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like, and my thing is like the stolen valor of being a back of the pack athlete when people are like, oh my God, I only did 9-minute miles today. Like I am a slow runner. And I'm like,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
like, come on. Like
Yeah.
let's have some context about this. And like maybe that's slow for you, but let's understand that that's not like what the back of the pack is looking like. So it's yeah, it's very frustrating because there's this idea that we want well, the idea, I guess, is that anybody can participate, but you know, they just don't because they don't want to work hard enough or whatever. Where instead of saying we want to be as welcoming as we possibly can, and how could we change to do that if we're not, you know, like if we're not attracting as many people as we want to, how can we change?
Right.
Rather than
Exactly.
how can we blame those people for not wanting to participate in our little clicky group?
Club. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Literally a club. Um, yeah. And diversity is always better. Everybody learns, you know, diverse. I mean, everything is always stronger and better with diversity. It's just like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah. And there again, like it's, you know, it's not, oh, how can we get some people of color to show up? How can we get some queer and trans
Right.
people to show up? It's how can we become a place where they want to come and are
Yeah.
safe to come? Right. So we're not thinking of it as white people and diversity or straight people and diversity and cis people and diversity, but like literally, this is a space where you're fully welcome. We have policies about that and your mistreatment won't be tolerated.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
how do we change ourselves to become that instead of just expecting people to walk into a toxic environment and deal with it so that we can pat ourselves on the back for being quote unquote diverse?
Yeah. 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 So I have this is my these are sort of like comment questions. I was reading your work and this is like also like a not fully formed thought that I have, but I feel like you're the person who can articulate this. I feel like this moment that we're in, this kind of like fat activist, there's like a lot of awareness. We're also in like the Ozempic era. There's just like so much happening. It feels like fatness is extra tricky because it to discuss or to kind of create knowledge and space around because it sort of intersects with so many aspects of our culture, beauty standards, health, you know, whatever ideals, self-expression, kind of identity, white cultural norms. Like there's just so many places, whereas like I don't know if we were talking about like dandruff or something, like it would just be like a different thing or something else, eye color, you know what I mean? It's like it's just seems like when people try to describe some aspect, there's always some other group that's like, oh, but it's unhealthy. And then you talk to those people, and then someone else is like, beauty standards. And then, you know, it's just like there's someone coming from every angle.
Yeah. So it's hard to overstate sort of so as I said, my area of expertise professionally is the intersections of weight science, weight stigma, health and healthcare. And it's difficult to overstate the impact that the weight loss industry has had in the way that we conceptualize and think about and talk about fat people, higher weight people. And sort of I have developed a bit of a subspecialty in the ways in which the weight loss industry has and continues to infiltrate and manipulate the healthcare industry. And so, first and foremost, no matter what, fat people have the right to exist without shame, stigma, bullying, or oppression. Doesn't matter why they're fat. Doesn't matter if their health impacts of being fat. Doesn't matter if they could or want to become thin. Right? Fat people have the right to exist and be fully accommodated in the world, period. So there's that. But then if we want to start to break down this idea of fatness as a disease, right? That is purely a weight loss industry construction, and they spent billions to make that happen. Right? The idea that simply existing in a higher weight body, regardless of actual health status, is a chronic lifelong disease requiring you to take expensive and medication with
Dangerous.
significant side effects for the rest of your life. That is pure weight loss industry construction. And it's really dangerous the way that they've done it and the way that they have sort of flooded the market, flooded society with this message that being higher weight. And like, this is not, there's, first of all, no shame in having a disease of any kind. the problem is just existing in a big body does not qualify, right? It's
Yeah.
the idea, these words, quote obese and quote overweight, were literally made up for the express purpose of pathologizing bodies based on shared size rather than shared cardiometabolic profile or symptomatology, the way that we define actual diseases. Right. And so, and now it's too long to get into today, but they're really trying to like refine this and, manipulate this definition further to create the largest possible market that they can. And this is an industry that has sold a product that fails 95% of the time or more and has made that into a multi-billion-dollar market. That's not easy to do. And they spent a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of marketing and PR talent to do it. But that's the bottom line. When you really start to investigate this, the construct really falls apart.
I think that messaging, the like fat being unhealthy messaging seems to me the hardest to unstick from our culture. It's just like, yeah, that because I think we are getting a lot more representation of fat, beautiful, fat, sexy, fat, having a great time, living a great life. The infiltration of just kind of medicalizing everything in our culture, just women's bodies, pregnancy, all kinds of things that are just like natural, including body diversity, I am overwhelmed sometimes. Like I just feel like it's so hard to, you just feel like you're like throwing, sand at like a giant steamroller coming towards you.
Yeah, it's an intense time, and it's, the CEO of Novo Nordisk, which makes the weight loss drug Wegovy, promised their shareholders massive profits. Their chief financial officer promised the fastest post FDA launch in history for their company. Right? This is their new blockbuster drug, and they're going to make as much money with it as they can, as fast as they can, right? In case we have another fen situation.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on just like the safety of these drugs, how they're being used, your fears, your concerns?
Yeah, so the GLP-1 agonist drugs, which there's a bunch of them, but the two biggest ones right now are tirzepatide and semaglutide. And so tirzepatide is Mounjaro for type 2 diabetes and Zepbound for weight loss. And then semaglutide is Ozempic for type 2 diabetes and Wegovy for weight loss. So what happened was these are solid type 2 diabetes drugs, but they have more side effects than a lot of drugs. So they're not necessarily a frontline drug, but they work very well for people who are contraindicated for other drugs, for people who can get the glycemic management they wanted on other drugs. They're solid type 2 diabetes drugs. And they have a small side effect of weight loss. And so what Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk asked was, well, if we gave people mega doses of these drugs, would that increase the amount of weight loss? And the answer was yes. And now we have these drugs approved as weight loss drugs. So the thing is, the difference is in titration and dosing. So when you're giving this medication to someone with type 2 diabetes, your goal is to give the smallest dose necessary in order to get the glycemic management that's desired and minimize side effects. When you're prescribing this drug for weight loss, the only goal is to maximize the side effect of weight loss, which maximizes all dose-dependent side effects. Right? So you're giving the schedules on these are just to get people titrated up as fast as possible. You titrate up at least at a minimum every 4 weeks to the highest dose they can possibly tolerate. And so that's where that's for side effects, that's my concern, right? We're giving people mega doses of these drugs. We don't have a long time of research on what these mega doses do to folks.
Right.
And so they're taking the general safety and efficacy of them at much lower doses for type 2 diabetes patients and acting like it's the same, and it's not.
So that's when you see the studies that are like, we've been testing these drugs for years. They're very safe. They're testing them at much lower doses for people who specifically have type 2 diabetes.
Correct. Currently, the maximum dose for Ozempic for type 2 diabetes is less than the recommended dose for weight loss.
Okay, the maximum dose.
for
Okay.
Wegovy. Yeah. So
Yeah.
the maximum dose for Ozempic is 2 milligrams, and that's up from 1 milligram just a few years ago. So they raised the maximum dose to 2, but then the recommended dose for weight loss is 2.4 milligrams. So it's a significant amount. A lot of people on Ozempic are on 0.5 milligrams for type 2 diabetes. So it's a difference of dosing and titration. And so that's where the complexity is. When I talk about the dangers of this, sometimes people who take it for type 2 diabetes get very concerned about the safety or are worried about the side effects. And there are side effects to these drugs, right? They have both the standard side effects are very gastrointestinal, but then they have like acute pancreatitis, ileus, which can be fatal. They have serious possible side effects. And for those side effects that are dose dependent, obviously, the more that you're taking, the more that you're risking.
We're in such a weird, like, sci-fi time to have drugs like this, you know? I was just speaking in an earlier episode, or I don't know what order they're going to come out with, but with a size inclusive doctor who, you know, has the ability to and does sometimes prescribe these drugs. And we were saying how, because of the kind of wacky world that we live in and celebrity worship and very binary thinking, people also think that this drug, it seems to me, is literally going to make them look like a Kardashian or something, you know, that because we live in such a fat phobic society, people have this like fantasy of what their thin self looks like, but it's a drug and drugs have side effects, and it's just sort of shrinking or you know, deflating you basically with these. You're trading one thing for another. It's not like it's suddenly like turning you 15 years younger or your former self before XYZ happened to you, you know? And I am just very curious what this is going to look like in 10 years, because I read Jessica DeFino's beauty newsletter. Do you know about her? She writes
Yeah.
yeah. And she was saying how, as we're seeing the rise of Ozempic, we're also seeing the rise of all these cosmetic procedures to like fill your face back in, like all this.
Yeah.
It's like opposition. We just did all this pull fat out of your face. Now we have put fat back in your face, you know, lift this, tuck that, because of weird rapid weight loss. It's boggling. Like, it's just.
Well, and that's for the people who have weird rapid weight loss. For some people, they don't lose much weight at all. Some people don't lose any weight. Some people lose it and then regain it even though they're still on the medication. And if you go off the medication, we know for sure that you regain the weight. So what happened was they invented every diet drug that ever existed, right? Which is you take the drug, you lose weight, you go off the drug, you gain it back.
Yeah.
But what they did from a marketing perspective that was marketing genius, like horrible, evil genius, is to say, oh, well, no, that's because quote unquote obesity, AKA existing in a fat body, is a chronic lifelong disease. So you just have to take the drugs for the rest of your life. And then in their studies, they redefined maintaining weight loss as gained back less than 20%. So they say, 80% of people maintained their weight loss. But what they meant was 80% gained back less than 20% in the first year on the drug. And so like, that'd be like if I said, oh, I started the race in first place and I maintained that till the end. And in truth, I finished in 19th place.
Right.
There's a tendency in weight science research to redefine words that have actual standard definitions to make things sound better than they are. Also, Wegovy's 4-year outcomes came out, and they were down from 15% weight loss average to 10% weight loss average. But worse, they went from about 9,000 people in the treatment group to 900. In 4 years, they lost 89.5% of their population. And these are drugs you have to take for the rest of your life.
Right.
So the research just doesn't match the hype. I've been doing deep dive analyses on weight and healthcare into these since they started. And it just, when you start to break down the study, the research just absolutely does not match the hype.
Yeah. It's really depressing.
Yeah, good times. Yeah, I'm really like a bit of a Debbie Downer in these conversations.
I wanted you're just like a font of being very articulate about all of these things. Can you describe like what does I don't even know. I'm stumped by our last. It's so depressing.
Sorry.
How do you? I mean, it's just because I feel like there's this. We're like, I mean, we clearly just like politically, we're just like in such a dark, bottomless pit. But I also feel this kind of cultural, like slamming into a cement wall coming with all this thinness because it does feel like we finally have the miracle thing, but there's that's not true because there nothing is ever a miracle thing. So what's gonna happen? Like I'm almost
Yeah.
like creeped out because this too shall end, but what could possibly come after it? I'm hopeful that we always swing to extremes, so hopefully there'll be like a big movement again of like accepting body diversity, but in the meantime, it seems like something that I am very disturbed about when I talk to people who have taken these drugs is it's basically an extreme crash diet that they just maintain because the drug makes them not hungry. And then I'm like we're just sort of medicalizing like essentially an anorexic or extreme eating disorder behavior and saying that it's okay because this person had pre-existing medical conditions of some kind, or their blood glucose and their cardiac thing is healthier. And I'm just like, I literally don't understand how you're gonna live literally eating so little. I like
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm pretty sure there's going to be a pretty extensive backlash to this, unfortunately. And I feel terrible for the people who are going to bear the brunt of that. But this is like a culmination of a lot of things. It's the lowering of the bar of what constitutes clinically significant weight loss, right? Which started out at these really high numbers. Like in the beginning, I would have had to lose 150 pounds to be considered to get clinically meaningful benefits. Today, it's about 8 pounds, an amount of weight I could lose here right now with a loofah and a haircut. And so by doing that, these drugs are quote unquote miracle drugs, but they're still only talking about an average 10 to 15% body weight loss, which for a lot of people, now body mass index is based in racism. And I want to say in general, weight stigma and anti-fatness is rooted in and inextricable from racism and anti-blackness, and highly recommend Sabrina String's Fearing the Black Body, Deshaun Harrison's Belly of the Beast to learn more about how that's happened and how it's continuing to disproportionately impact those communities.
yeah.
Right. But this idea of any amount of weight loss will give you some kind of benefit is, again, a weight loss industry construct. So their quote unquote miracle wouldn't even move most people out of their BMI categories, right?
Right.
It's not unless they were pretty close to the line to begin with. And so it's this huge construct. We're already seeing deaths, right? A lot from ileus, for example, which is, so part of the way that these drugs work is to slow down gastric emptying. So the food just stays in the body longer, which makes people feel full. So that's part of it, not all of it, but part of it. But if that happens too much, if peristalsis stops, the body can't eliminate solid waste. And that can be fatal and requires typically hospitalization, right? So we're seeing from that. And so I think there's that danger that's happening. And there's this idea that it's worth risking fat people's lives and quality of life to make them even a little bit thinner. And that's what the FDA is using as its approval risk benefit metric. And that's what's terrifying to me, because people say, oh, well, it's FDA approved, it must be safe. No, the FDA says that this is worth the risk, but their threshold for fat people's lives is so low that they're willing to risk the lives and quality of life of fat people. And what this research scrupulously avoids is ever having a weight neutral comparison group. Right.
Yeah,
There's good research that shows that weight neutral behavior based interventions can have more or similar benefits with far fewer risks. And so if they had to have a weight neutral group and say, well, did they have the same health benefits without the risks of these drugs? That would be a very different conversation I feel like we'd be having. But they never, never, never do that. They compared the drugs to the same weight loss interventions that they say in their first paragraph they know don't work.
Yeah.
It's like comparing your new drug to a known failed intervention is nice work if you can get it, but it's not good science.
I feel like what we're talking about is capitalism in 1,000 different ways. And I feel like so often what we're talking about, it's when we talk about like disease or pathology around people's body. And did a post about this a while ago where I was like, not obviously not all fat people are unhealthy. There are plenty of behaviors that cause ill health that also thin people do, and thin people also get those diseases or those pathologies or whatever. And what we're really talking about is like a grind culture capitalist society where people don't have time to get food, they don't have time to make food, they don't have time to sit down and eat a meal, they don't have time for community, for rest, for enjoyment, creativity, restoration. All of those things, if you can get those things, you are healthier, regardless of your body size. And when we aren't able to have those things, we're stressed out people. We're doing other behaviors that we do to alleviate our stress: smoking, drinking, stress eating, scrolling, watching TV, not meeting up with people because we're too exhausted, things like that. I feel like these drugs are just this like sci-fi, apex to this story of like driving our population into such distraction and loneliness and just kind of desert when it comes to, I have some clients who are incredibly wealthy who live on like Luna bars and half a bagel from the bodega, and they've got all the money in the world for the best meats, the best produce, but they come home at 9:30 at night because they work like 80 billion hours a week. They leave at 6 in the morning and they live on just complete junk. Like like they live in a food desert, like they live somewhere, a teeny little town that's got, no resource or whatever. And they're in the middle of Brooklyn with like the best grocery stores and the finest of this and that. I just feel like we're slapping these drugs on top of, obviously, like we need a sea change where people can take care of all these other aspects of their lives. And whether or not that affects their body weight, it will affect their health, their literal health.
Well,
And also, I think in terms of people's body weight, it would give people, like, if people are just happier, then they're happier, and then they're not so desperate, because you're like, the drug companies are willing to risk fat people's lives. Fat people are willing to risk their own lives to not experience fat phobia anymore.
Exactly.
To have this, oh, once I'm thinner, my whole life will be better thing. And in some ways it will be, because fat phobia is so painful and toxic, but also there's all these terrible potential risks. And I also just feel like if all these people like just lived in a better society, we all would be less self-obsessed. We all would not be like, if my skin looked like this, my life would be better. Like, that's just a symptom of like lack of connection and no creative outlets and not being fulfilled. Like, no one really believes that once you get those other aspects of your life, connected.
You're absolutely right. Weight stigma is real, and it impacts fat people in every aspect of our lives. We're hired less, paid less, and promoted less than similarly qualified than people. We don't have the same access to clothes, to leisure activities, and oppression. The experience of oppression is shown to do physical harm, right?
Yes.
Which is another thing that weight science, weight loss research never controls for experiences of weight cycling and weight stigma, which are linked to the exact same things that get blamed on being higher weight, right? So people's lives will be better if they're thinner in the current world because of weight stigma. And if an individual wants to try to become thinner to escape weight stigma, that's their right. I fully believe in bodily autonomy. But as a society, when we say that the right answer is people to risk their lives and quality of life to suit their oppressors to escape oppression, that's never the right answer. And that's what we're being asked to do. It seems like the healthcare system and public health is willing to do anything except create a world where fat people can thrive.
Yeah. Well, and really where people can thrive. All people, Yeah. Because this isn't I'm not drawing a false equivalency, but I know 3 or 4 like thin and objectively fit people who like are very active, who basically experience fat phobia because they were told by doctors that they're fine, and they all had very severe medical issues that no one would listen to because the doctor just kept saying, oh, you're thin and you're fit, so you don't have a problem. And like one of them literally almost would have had a cardiac event if another person hadn't walked in the room and been like, oh, I think you're having an emergency. Like, this is the world that we live in, that humans are missed.
Yes. Weight stigma harms people of all sizes. It always does the most harm to those at the highest weights and those with multiple marginalized identities, but it does harm everyone in its wake.
It's like how patriarchy harms men. And,
Yeah.
we're all in the boat together. Well, on that really uplifting note.
I will say, I'll finish with this. I spent years fighting my body on behalf of weight stigma. And knowing that weight stigma is real and impacts me, what I decided was that instead I was going to fight weight stigma on behalf of my body. And that choice has made all the difference in my life.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being on. I hope to have you back to we can nerd out more about dance or something.
Anytime. Thank you so much, Cadence.
Too many topics.
For real.
Thank you. That was Busybody Podcast. I'm the founder and owner of Brooklyn Strength Studios. You can find me on Instagram at Brooklyn Strength. You can find out more about my offerings on my website, brooklynstrength.com. I hope you'll subscribe to my Substack after class. All's in the show notes. Please rate, review, and subscribe. Please share with your friends so that more people listen to this podcast. I love these conversations, and I hope more people can hear them. My music is by Rob Byrne, performed by the Wild Yaks. My podcast is produced by Brad at Soundtrain Studios, and my illustrations are by Jackie Mendez and Azul Trejo, and edited by myself. Thank you so much.